Marcus Webb slammed a stack of documents onto the mahogany table. His lawyer flinched. "File it," Marcus said. "Every penny. I want them to think I'm broke." His lawyer stared. "Sir, you're worth $2.3 billion. You want me to create fake bankruptcy papers? I want to know who actually loves me." What Marcus didn't know, what he couldn't have possibly known, was that his 74-year-old mother had been waiting 15 years for this exact moment. She knew everything. And she was about to teach her billionaire son the most expensive lesson of his life. Before we continue, drop a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The sedan shook violently as Marcus Webb pulled off the highway onto the cracked asphalt of Ridgewood Lane. He gripped the steering wheel tighter. The car was a 2003 Honda Civic with rust eating through the wheel wells and a crack running down the windshield like a scar. He had paid cash for it 3 days ago at a used car lot in Newark. The salesman had looked at him with pity. Good. That was exactly what he wanted. Marcus checked himself in the rearview mirror. His beard had grown in patchy and unkempt over the past 2 weeks. His hair, usually trimmed every 10 days by a barber who charged $400 a session, now hung limp and greasy against his forehead. The shirt he wore had a coffee stain on the collar that he had put there deliberately. He looked like a man who had lost everything. And that was the point. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it. His CFO again. 3rd time in the last hour. "Sir, the Shanghai acquisition needs your signature by midnight. Please call." Marcus turned off the phone and shoved it into the glove compartment. For the next few months, Marcus Webb the billionaire did not exist. Only Marcus Webb the failure, the bankrupt, the man who needed help. He pulled into the driveway of his mother's house and sat there for a long moment, staring at the brick colonial where he had grown up. The house looked smaller than he remembered. The paint on the shutters was peeling. The lawn needed work. 15 years. That's how long it had been since he had come home for more than a quick holiday visit. 15 years since he had left this neighborhood with nothing but a bus ticket and a dream. 15 years of building, climbing, acquiring, winning. And in all that time, his family had only ever called when they needed something. Denise needed money for her kids' private school. Patricia needed an investment in her event planning business. Raymond needed a loan to start his landscaping company. His aunts and uncles needed help with medical bills, car payments, mortgage troubles. He had given them everything they asked for, every single time. And not once had any of them called just to ask how he was doing. Marcus got out of the car and walked toward the front door. His mother opened it before he could knock. Eleanor Webb stood in the doorway, 74 years old, her gray hair pulled back in the same style she had worn for as long as Marcus could remember. Her dress was simple. Her eyes were sharp. "Marcus?" "Mama." She studied him for a moment. Her gaze moved from his unkempt hair to his stained shirt to his worn shoes. Something flickered across her face. Something Marcus couldn't quite identify, but it disappeared so quickly he thought he might have imagined it. Then she pulled him into a hug. She held him for 3 seconds longer than normal. Maybe 4. Long enough for Marcus to notice. "Come on in, baby," she said quietly. "Everyone's here." The house smelled like Sunday dinner. Collard greens simmering on the stove, fried chicken cooling on paper towels, cornbread still warm from the oven, sweet potato pie waiting on the counter. Marcus felt his chest tighten. This smell, this house, these memories. He had spent 15 years trying to escape all of it, and now he was walking right back in. The dining room was full. His sister Denise sat at the far end of the table, her designer handbag placed on the chair beside her like it deserved its own seat. She was 51 now, a hospital administrator who had clawed her way up the corporate ladder with the same ferocity she had used to claw at her siblings growing up. Her suit probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. His sister Patricia sat across from Denise, Her nails freshly manicured her jewelry, catching the light every time she moved. She was 48 and ran a luxury event planning business that catered to the wealthy elite of the region. She had always cared more about appearances than substance. And then there was Raymond. His younger brother sat at the table with dirt still visible under his fingernails. 43 years old, running a small landscaping business, wearing a flannel shirt that had seen better days. Of all his siblings, Raymond had always been the most down-to-earth, the most real. Or so Marcus had always believed. Marcus! Raymond stood up immediately, his face breaking into a wide smile. Man, we didn't know you were coming. Why didn't you call? Raymond moved around the table and pulled Marcus into a tight embrace. A real embrace. Not the polite, distant hugs that Denise and Patricia offered. Good to see you, Ray. Good to see you too, brother. It's been too long. Denise stood up slowly, her smile carefully measured. Well, this is a surprise. We thought you were too busy with your big, important life in Seattle to visit. Things change, Marcus said. Apparently. Patricia's eyes moved over his appearance with barely concealed judgment. You look different. Marcus took a deep breath. This was it. The moment he had been planning for weeks. I need to tell you all something. The room went quiet. Eleanor moved to her seat at the head of the table. Various aunts and uncles who had been helping in the kitchen began filing in, sensing that something important was about to happen. Uncle Morris, Aunt Gladys, Cousin Terence. They all found seats or leaned against the walls, watching Marcus with curious expressions. Marcus looked at each of them in turn. His mother, his sisters, his brother, his extended family, the people who shared his blood. I lost everything, he said. The words hung in the air like smoke. There was a lawsuit, a big one. One of my early investors claimed I had defrauded him during the initial funding rounds. It was a lie, a complete lie, but by the time my lawyers were done fighting it, the legal fees had eaten through everything. The courts froze my accounts during the proceedings. The house was foreclosed. The business collapsed. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. I'm bankrupt, completely broke. I have nothing left, and I need somewhere to stay for a few months while I figure out how to rebuild. Silence. Not the sympathetic silence of a family rallying around a member in crisis. Not the warm silence of people processing difficult news before offering support. This was a cold silence, a calculating silence. The kind of silence that told Marcus everything he needed to know. Denise was the first to speak. Marcus, that's terrible. Really terrible. She picked up her napkin and dabbed at the corner of her mouth, even though she hadn't eaten anything yet. But I don't know if I can help you right now. My house is in the middle of major renovations. Contractors everywhere. Dust and noise at all hours. It would be really disruptive for everyone. It would only be for a few months, Marcus said. Just until I get back on my feet. A few months. Denise shook her head slowly. Marcus, I have my own family to think about. My kids are in crucial years of their education. I can't have chaos in my home right now. I'm sure you understand. Marcus turned to Patricia. His younger sister suddenly became very interested in examining her manicure. The situation is complicated for me as well, she said, her voice carrying that practiced politeness that Marcus had always hated. I'm hosting the Metropolitan Charity Gala next month. It's a very high-profile event. I have clients flying in from all over the country. Having you there during the preparation, it would really undermine the image we've been cultivating. Undermine the image, Marcus repeated flatly. You know how these things work. Perception is everything in my business. I can't have people seeing. She gestured vaguely at his stained shirt, his worn shoes. I'm sure you understand. I'm sure you understand. That phrase again. The polite dismissal dressed up as consideration. Marcus looked at his aunts and uncles. They suddenly found the floor very interesting. Uncle Morris mumbled something about having just taken in his sister and not having any extra room. Aunt Gladys mentioned that her house was too small, that she could barely fit herself in there. Cousin Terence avoided eye contact entirely. One by one they made their excuses. They were sorry. They wished they could help. But circumstances were difficult. Times were tough. Their hands were tied. Marcus felt something hardening inside his chest. Not surprised he had expected this. But there was a difference between expecting something and experiencing it. There was a difference between believing your family was selfish and watching them prove it right in front of you. He turned to look at his mother. Eleanor sat at the head of the table, her hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable. She met his eyes, but said nothing. Why wasn't she saying anything? Why wasn't she defending him? Why wasn't she offering him her home? The home where he had grown up. The home where his bedroom still had his old trophies on the shelf. The silence stretched on. And then Raymond spoke. "Y'all should be ashamed of yourselves." Everyone turned to look at him. Raymond pushed back from the table and stood up. His jaw was tight. His eyes were angry. "This man, your brother, your nephew, your son, comes home after 15 years. He tells you he's lost everything. He asks for help. And every single one of you sits there making excuses." "Raymond?" Denise started. "No." Raymond held up his hand. "No, Denise. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear about your renovations or your galas or your space problems. This is family. This is what family is supposed to be for." He walked around the table and stood next to Marcus, placed his hand on his brother's shoulder. "Marcus, I don't care about the money. I never cared about all that. You know me. I run a small landscaping business. I work with my hands. I'm not trying to be a billionaire or a CEO or any of that. I just want to live my life and be good to the people I love." His voice cracked slightly. "And I love you, man. You're my brother. You come work with me. We'll get you back on your feet together. And you can stay with me as long as you need. My house is your house. My food is your food. Whatever I have, you have." Marcus felt his throat tighten. Maybe he had been wrong. Maybe there was one good person in this family after all. Maybe after all these years of cynicism and suspicion, there was still someone who loved him for who he was, not what he could provide. Raymond pulled him into another hug. This time, Marcus hugged him back. "Thank you, Ray," he said quietly. "You don't know what this means to me." That's what brothers are for. The next morning, Marcus woke up in Raymond's spare room. It was small, plain, a single bed with clean sheets, a window that looked out onto a quiet street lined with modest homes and pickup trucks parked in driveways. The walls were painted a pale green that was probably left over from the previous owner. Marcus lay there for a long moment, staring at the ceiling. For 15 years he had woken up in penthouses and luxury hotels, in houses with more bedrooms than he could use, and views that looked out over entire cities. He had grown accustomed to Egyptian cotton sheets, and temperature-controlled everything, and assistants who made sure his coffee was ready the moment he opened his eyes. And now he was here, in his brother's spare room, in a house that probably cost less than his monthly cleaning bill back in Seattle. Strangely, he felt more at peace than he had in years. He found a note on the kitchen table. "Marcus, had to leave early for a job. Make yourself at home, food in the fridge. I'll pick you up at noon to meet the crew." Ray Marcus smiled. He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat at the small kitchen table, looking out the window at the neighborhood where his brother had built his life. This was real. This was honest. This was what he had been missing. At noon, Raymond's truck pulled up outside. Marcus climbed in and they drove to a job site across town, a large property that needed fall cleanup before winter set in. Raymond introduced Marcus to his crew. 5 guys, all of them working-class men with calloused hands and easy smiles. They shook Marcus's hand without judgment, without asking questions about who he was or where he came from. "This is my brother," Raymond told them. "He's going to be helping out for a while." That was it. No explanations needed, no pity, just acceptance. Marcus spent the day raking leaves, trimming hedges, hauling bags of mulch from the truck to the flower beds. His back ached. His hands blistered. By the end of the day, his muscles screamed in protest at work they had never been asked to do. He loved every single second of it. There was something pure about physical labor, something honest about working with your hands, seeing the tangible results of your effort. When Marcus looked at the property at the end of the day, he could point to exactly what he had accomplished. No spreadsheets, no quarterly projections, no abstract metrics, just a clean yard and the satisfaction of honest work. Over the next few weeks, Marcus settled into a routine. He woke up early, worked with Raymond's crew all day, came home exhausted but satisfied. In the evenings, he and Raymond would sit on the porch with beers in hand, watching the sun go down, talking about life. Raymond told him about the challenges of running a small business, about the clients who tried to haggle or who paid late, about his dreams of expanding, maybe getting into landscape design, maybe hiring a few more guys. He told Marcus about the girl he was seeing, a barista at the coffee shop down the street. Her name was Jasmine. She had a laugh that could light up a room and a smile that made Raymond forget about everything else. "You should bring her by sometime," Marcus said. "I'd like to meet her." Raymond grinned. "Maybe I will." They talked about their childhood, about their father who had died when Marcus was 10 and Raymond was only 8, about their mother who had worked 2 jobs to keep the family afloat, about the struggles they had faced, the sacrifices that had been made. "Mama never complained," Raymond said one evening. "Not once. Dad was gone, money was tight, and she just kept going, every day, for us." Marcus nodded slowly. He had spent so many years focused on his own journey, his own success, that he had almost forgotten what his mother had endured. "I should have come home more," he said quietly. Raymond shrugged. "You're here now. That's what matters." It was on a Tuesday afternoon, about 3 weeks after Marcus arrived, that everything changed. Raymond had sent Marcus to the truck to grab a specific shovel. Marcus climbed into the bed of the truck and started rummaging through the tools. That's when his hand brushed against something that shouldn't have been there. A leather-bound ledger tucked behind a loose panel in the truck bed. Hidden. Deliberately concealed. Marcus knew he shouldn't look. He knew that opening that ledger would be a violation of his brother's privacy, a betrayal of the trust Raymond had shown him. But something made him do it anyway. He pulled out the ledger and opened it. What he saw made his blood run cold. Pages and pages of names, addresses, dollar amounts, notes in the margins, photographs of houses. Marcus recognized the pattern immediately. He had studied enough business practices, seen enough predatory schemes to know exactly what he was looking at. This was a list of elderly homeowners in his mother's neighborhood. People on fixed incomes. People who had lived in those houses for decades. People who were vulnerable. And next to each name was an offer amount. An amount that was far below market value. Half of what these properties were actually worth. Sometimes less. There were notes about how to approach each homeowner. Details about their financial situations, who was behind on their property taxes, who had recent medical bills, who had family members pressuring them to sell. There were references to a silent partnership with a real estate development firm. There were plans for what would happen to the properties after they were acquired: demolition, new construction, gentrification. Marcus flipped through the pages, his hands trembling. And then he found it. His parents' address. His mother's name, an offer amount that was less than half of what the house was worth. His brother, the one person in his family who had taken him in, who had shown him kindness, who had restored his faith in humanity, was running a predatory real estate scheme. A scheme designed to swindle elderly homeowners out of their properties. A scheme that included their own mother's house. Marcus heard Raymond's truck pulling back toward the worksite. He shoved the ledger back behind the panel, exactly where he had found it. His hands were shaking. His mind was racing. For 3 weeks he had believed that Raymond was different, that Raymond was good, that Raymond loved him for who he was, not what he could provide. And now he realized the truth. Raymond had taken him in because he thought Marcus was broke. But more than that, Raymond had seen an opportunity. A supposedly bankrupt brother who had once been a tech billionaire might still have connections, might still have knowledge, might still be useful to a real estate scheme that needed technical expertise, financial know-how, inside information. Raymond's kindness had never been about love, it had been about access. Marcus sat in the truck bed staring at nothing, feeling something inside him die. That evening, Marcus barely spoke. Raymond didn't seem to notice. He was excited talking about a big job they had lined up for the following week, asking if Marcus wanted to grab dinner at the diner down the street. "You okay, man?" Raymond asked, finally glancing over at his brother. "You've been quiet all afternoon." "Just tired," Marcus said. "It's been a long day." "Yeah, I feel you." "Hey, maybe we should take tomorrow off. Go fishing or something. Like we used to when we were kids." Marcus forced a smile. "Maybe." That night, lying in the spare room that had started to feel like home, Marcus made a decision. He was going to end this. He was going to call a family meeting. He was going to reveal who he really was. The bank accounts, the investment portfolios, the real estate holdings, the net worth that made everyone in that family look like paupers by comparison. He was going to show them that they had all failed his test. Every single one of them. His sisters, who had rejected him the moment he claimed to be broke. His aunts and uncles who had made excuses. And his brother who had seemed so genuine but was actually running a scheme to steal from elderly homeowners, including their own mother. He was going to reveal the truth. And then he was going to walk away. He would give them nothing, not a single dollar, not a single investment, not a single helping hand. He would leave them with exactly what they deserved, the knowledge of who they really were. Marcus picked up his phone and sent a text to his mother. "I need to talk to everyone. Can you arrange a family meeting at the diner on Sunday evening, 7 p.m.? The response came back a few minutes later. "I'll let everyone know." Marcus set down the phone and stared at the ceiling. 6 more days. 6 more days of pretending. 6 more days of working alongside a brother who was planning to swindle their own mother out of her home. And then finally, the truth would come out. All of it. The next 6 days felt like walking through quicksand. Marcus woke up each morning in Raymond's spare room, stared at the ceiling for a few minutes, then forced himself to get out of bed and pretend that nothing had changed. He ate breakfast at the small kitchen table. He climbed into Raymond's truck. He worked alongside the crew, raking and hauling and trimming, his hands calloused, now his muscles no longer screaming in protest. And every single moment he was watching. Raymond moved through his days with an ease that Marcus had once admired. He joked with the crew. He called clients to confirm appointments. He stopped at the coffee shop to flirt with Jasmine, who blushed and laughed and gave him an extra shot of espresso for free. He looked like a good man. He acted like a good man. But Marcus knew the truth now. On Wednesday morning, Raymond handed Marcus a bottle of water and sat down next to him on the tailgate of the truck. They were taking a break from a particularly grueling job, a property that had been neglected for years and required 3 times the normal effort. "You know what I've been thinking about," Raymond said. "What's that?" "Expansion." Raymond took a long drink of water. "I've been running this business for 6 years now and it's good. It pays the bills. But I feel like I could do more, get into landscape design, maybe hardscaping patios, retaining walls, that kind of thing. There's good money in that." Marcus kept his voice neutral. "Sounds like a solid plan." "The problem is capital." Raymond shook his head. "Banks don't want to lend to small operations like mine. They want collateral, credit history, all that stuff, and I just don't have it." Marcus said nothing. "I've been thinking about other ways to raise money," Raymond continued. "Creative financing, they call it. Finding investors who believe in what you're doing and are willing to take a risk." "What kind of investors?" Raymond shrugged. "All kinds. There are people out there with money who are looking for opportunities. Real estate people mostly. They understand that land is valuable, that property is the foundation of wealth. They get it." Marcus felt his stomach turn. He knew exactly what kind of investors Raymond was talking about. He had seen their names in the ledger. The development firm. The silent partners. The people who were bankrolling a scheme to swindle elderly homeowners out of their properties. Sounds complicated, Marcus said carefully. It is. Raymond stood up and stretched. But you know what Dad always said. Nothing worth having comes easy. Marcus flinched at the mention of their father. Walter Webb had been a hard-working man who had never cheated anyone in his life. He had died at 42 from a heart attack, leaving behind a wife and 4 children, and nothing but his good name. Raymond invoking their father's memory to justify a predatory real estate scheme felt like a desecration. But Marcus said nothing. He just nodded and got back to work. That evening, they sat on the porch as usual. Raymond cracked open a beer and handed one to Marcus. "Can I ask you something?" Raymond said. "Sure." "When you were building your company back when things were good, did you ever have to make choices that felt complicated?" Marcus looked at his brother. "What do you mean?" "I mean, did you ever have to do things that maybe weren't perfect, but they were necessary? Things that other people might not understand, but you knew were the right move for the long term?" Marcus took a slow sip of his beer. "I'm not sure I follow." Raymond leaned back in his chair. "I'm just saying building something from nothing is hard. Sometimes you have to be creative. Sometimes you have to bend the rules a little. That's just how the game is played. And you think the ends justify the means. I think that people who have never tried to build anything don't understand what it takes." Raymond's voice had an edge to it now. They sit there in their comfortable lives judging people who are out here grinding every day trying to make something of themselves. They don't know what it's like to struggle, to sacrifice, to do whatever it takes. Marcus felt cold despite the warmth of the evening. His brother wasn't just involved in the scheme. He was proud of it. He had rationalized it to himself until it made sense, until it felt justified, until the elderly homeowners he was swindling became obstacles to his success, rather than victims of his greed. "I think I'm going to turn in early," Marcus said. "Long day tomorrow." Raymond waved his beer bottle. "Yeah, sure. Get some rest." Marcus walked inside and closed the door behind him. He stood in the dark hallway for a long moment, his back against the wall, his eyes closed. 4 more days. Thursday brought rain, which meant the crew couldn't work. Raymond suggested they use the day to catch up on equipment maintenance, so Marcus found himself in the garage cleaning tools and organizing supplies. Raymond's phone rang around midday. He glanced at the screen and his expression changed, became sharper, more focused. "I need to take this," he said. "Keep working on those hedge trimmers." He stepped outside, pulling the garage door partially closed behind him. But Marcus could still hear his voice through the gap. "Yeah, I got the updated list. No 3 of them are definitely ready to sell. The Robinson property on Maple Street, the Williams place on Oak, and the Carter house on Elm. Yeah, all of them are behind on taxes. We approach them next week." Marcus's hands tightened around the hedge trimmer he was holding. "What about the Webb property?" "My mother's place." "No, not yet. I need more time on that one. She's stubborn, you know how she is." "Yeah, I'm working on it. Trust me." The conversation continued for a few more minutes, but Marcus had stopped listening. He felt numb, frozen, like he was watching himself from very far away. His brother was planning to take their mother's home, not just participating in a scheme that included her property, actively working to make it happen. "I'm working on it, trust me." Raymond came back into the garage, his face arranged in that easy smile that Marcus had once found so reassuring. "Sorry about that. Client stuff." "No problem," Marcus heard himself say. "Hey, you okay? You look pale." "Just the weather makes my head hurt." Raymond nodded sympathetically. "Yeah, I get that. Why don't you take a break? Go lie down for a bit. I'll finish up here." Marcus set down the hedge trimmer and walked out of the garage. His legs felt like they belonged to someone else. His brain felt like it was full of static. 3 more days. On Friday, Marcus made an excuse about not feeling well and stayed at the house while Raymond went to work with the crew. As soon as Raymond's truck disappeared around the corner, Marcus went to the garage. The ledger was still there, hidden behind the loose panel. Marcus pulled it out and sat down on an overturned bucket to study it more carefully. The more he read, the more his disgust grew. There were detailed notes on each target. How long they had lived in their homes, whether they had family nearby, what their health situations were, whether they had been approached before by other buyers. One entry caught Marcus's attention. A woman named Dorothy Patterson, 83 years old. Husband deceased. Children lived out of state. Notes indicated that she had been hospitalized recently and was struggling with medical bills. Approach after her son leaves. She'll be more vulnerable alone. Initial offer, $85,000. Property value, $210,000. Marcus felt sick. These weren't just numbers on a page. These were people. People who had worked their entire lives, raised families, built memories in these homes. And Raymond and his partners were circling them like vultures, waiting for the right moment to swoop in and take everything. He flipped to his mother's entry. Eleanor Webb, 74 years old. Husband deceased 1994. Property value $195,000. Current offer $90,000. Status pending. Notes. Son Raymond has established trust. Working on long-term approach. Will recommend downsizing when timing is right. Marcus read those words 3 times. Son Raymond has established trust. His brother wasn't just going to swindle their mother. He was going to use their relationship to do it. He was going to play the loving son, the concerned child, until Eleanor trusted him completely. And then he was going to convince her that selling her home, the home where she had raised 4 children, where she had lived for 40 years, where she had built her entire life, was the right thing to do. Marcus put the ledger back and walked into the house. He sat at the kitchen table and stared at his hands for a long time. He had come home looking for evidence that his family didn't really love him. And he had found it in spades. But this was worse than simple greed. This was betrayal on a scale he hadn't imagined possible. His sisters had rejected him when they thought he was broke. That was selfish, but it was honest. They showed him who they were. But Raymond had welcomed him in. Raymond had given him a job, a place to stay, brotherhood. Raymond had made him believe that there was still something good in this family. And the whole time, Raymond had been planning to destroy their mother's life. Marcus picked up his phone and almost called his mother right then. Almost told her everything. But something stopped him. He wanted to do this right. He wanted everyone to see. He wanted the whole family sitting there when the truth came out. Not just about Raymond's scheme, but about all of them. Their greed, their selfishness, their failure to be there for each other when it mattered. 2 more days. Saturday was harder than Marcus expected. Raymond was in high spirits. The rain had cleared. The crew had a full schedule of jobs lined up, and Jasmine had finally agreed to go out on a proper date with him the following weekend. "Can you believe it?" Raymond said as they drove to their first job site. 6 months I've been asking, and she finally said yes. Marcus forced a smile. "That's great, Ray. I'm thinking I'll take her to that Italian place downtown, the fancy one. Really impress her." "She'll love it." Raymond glanced over at him. "You sure you're okay? You've been weird the last couple days." "Just tired, and thinking about tomorrow." "The family meeting." Raymond nodded slowly. "Yeah, I've been thinking about that too. What are you planning to say?" Marcus considered his answer carefully. "I'm not sure yet. I guess I just want everyone to be honest with each other. Really honest. About who we are and what we want." Raymond was quiet for a moment. "That sounds heavy." "It is." They drove in silence for a while. Then Raymond spoke again. "Listen, Marcus. I know things have been rough for you. Losing everything, having to start over. But I want you to know that I believe in you. I really do. You built something amazing once, and you'll do it again." "Thanks, Ray. And whatever happens tomorrow, whatever gets said, I want you to know that you'll always have a place with me. That's what family is for." Marcus looked out the window so Raymond wouldn't see his face. The audacity of it. The absolute audacity of sitting there spouting words about family and loyalty while planning to swindle their own mother out of her home. Marcus had met a lot of ruthless people in his career. He had done business with sharks who would smile while they cut your throat. But he had never encountered anything quite like this, someone who could look their own brother in the eye and lie so completely, so convincingly, without a flicker of guilt. "I appreciate that," Marcus said quietly, and that was the last thing he said for the rest of the day. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay in the spare room staring at the ceiling, running through everything he was going to say tomorrow. He had it all planned out. He would wait until everyone was seated. He would let them make small talk for a few minutes, and then he would begin. He would tell them about the test, about how he had come home pretending to be bankrupt to see how they would treat him. He would describe their reactions, Denise's excuses, Patricia's concern about aesthetics, the aunts and uncles with their convenient explanations. Then he would talk about Raymond, about the ledger, about the scheme, about the entry with their mother's name on it. And finally, he would reveal the truth about himself. He would show them his bank account, the real one, not the fake bankruptcy papers. He would let them see exactly how much money he had, and he would tell them that they weren't getting a single penny. He would tell them that he had come home looking for love, and instead he had found only greed. That he had wanted to believe there was still something good in this family, but they had proven him wrong. Every single one of them. Then he would walk out. Forever. He rehearsed the speech in his head 100 times. He refined it, polished it, made sure every word carried maximum impact. And yet somewhere around 3 a.m., doubt began to creep in. What was he actually trying to accomplish? Revenge, justice, closure. He told himself it was about the truth, about forcing his family to confront who they really were, about holding up a mirror and making them look at themselves. But was that really it? Or was there something else going on? Something he didn't want to admit to himself? Marcus thought about his mother, about the way she had hugged him when he arrived, about those extra 3 seconds, about the look in her eyes that he couldn't quite identify. She had known something was wrong. She had sensed it, but she hadn't said anything. Why? He thought about his father, Walter Webb, who had worked himself to death trying to provide for his family, who had never had much but had given everything he had, who had died before Marcus could really know him, leaving behind only fragments of memory and a legacy of hard work and integrity. What would his father think of all this? Of the test, of the elaborate deception, of a son who had become so obsessed with proving that people didn't love him, that he had created a scenario designed to confirm his worst fears. Marcus rolled over and buried his face in the pillow. One more day. Sunday morning arrived gray and cold. Marcus got up early and made coffee. He sat at the kitchen table and watched the sun struggle to break through the clouds. Raymond emerged around 9 a.m., yawning and stretching. "Big day," he said. "Yeah. You ready for this family meeting thing?" Marcus nodded slowly. "I think so." Raymond poured himself a cup of coffee and sat down across from his brother. "You know, I've been thinking about what you said yesterday. About honesty. About people being real with each other. And I think you're right." Raymond wrapped his hands around his mug. "I think this family has been keeping too many secrets for too long. I think it's time we all put our cards on the table." Marcus studied his brother's face, looking for any sign that he knew what was coming. But Raymond's expression was open earnest, the same expression he had worn for the past 3 weeks. The perfect mask. "I couldn't agree more," Marcus said. They spent the rest of the morning in separate rooms. Marcus pretended to read a book. Raymond made phone calls and tapped away on his laptop, probably coordinating with his partners about the next phase of their scheme. At 6 p.m., they got in Raymond's truck and drove to the diner. The parking lot was already filling up. Marcus recognized Denise's Mercedes, Patricia's Lexus, various other cars belonging to aunts and uncles and cousins. "Full house," Raymond observed. "Looks like it." They walked inside together. The family had commandeered a large corner booth and the tables surrounding it. Marcus scanned the faces: Denise with her designer bag, Patricia with her perfect makeup, Uncle Morris looking uncomfortable, Aunt Gladys fidgeting with her napkin. And at the head of the table in the seat that gave her a clear view of everyone sat Eleanor Webb. She looked up as Marcus entered. Their eyes met. And for just a moment, just a fraction of a second, Marcus thought he saw something in her expression. Something that looked almost like anticipation. But then it was gone, replaced by that warm, neutral smile she had worn for as long as he could remember. "There's my boy," she said. "Come sit down. We're all here." Marcus took a seat across from his mother. Raymond slid in next to him. A waitress came by and took drink orders. Small talk bubbled up around the table, complaints about traffic, comments on the weather, questions about various relatives who weren't present. Marcus sat in silence, waiting. After about 15 minutes, when everyone had their drinks and the conversation had settled into a comfortable rhythm, Marcus cleared his throat. "I asked you all here because I have something to say." The table went quiet. Denise set down her water glass. Patricia stopped adjusting her bracelet. Raymond shifted slightly in his seat. Eleanor folded her hands in her lap and watched her son with that unreadable expression. "3 weeks ago I came home and told you all that I was bankrupt," Marcus began. "That I had lost everything in a lawsuit. That I needed help." He paused, letting the memory settle over the room. "And every single person at this table except one told me no." Denise opened her mouth to speak, but Marcus held up his hand. "Let me finish." She closed her mouth. "Denise, you told me your house was too crowded. Patricia, you said having me around would ruin the aesthetic for your charity gala. Uncle Morris, you said you had just taken in your sister. Everyone had an excuse. Everyone had a reason why they couldn't help." Marcus looked around the table, meeting each person's eyes in turn. "The only person who took me in was Raymond. The only person who offered me a job, a place to stay, a sense of brotherhood. And for 3 weeks I believed that he was the one good person in this family." Raymond sat up a little straighter, his chest puffing out slightly. "But then I found something." The words hung in the air. Raymond's expression flickered. Just for a moment. Just enough for Marcus to notice. "I found a ledger. Hidden in your truck. A ledger full of names and addresses and dollar amounts. A ledger documenting a scheme to swindle elderly homeowners out of their properties at a fraction of what they're worth." The color drained from Raymond's face. "Dorothy Patterson, 83 years old, recently hospitalized, struggling with medical bills. You're planning to approach her after her son leaves because she'll be more vulnerable alone. You're going to offer her $85,000 for a house worth over $200,000. "Marcus," Raymond started. "I'm not finished." Raymond's mouth snapped shut. "There were dozens of names in that ledger. Dozens of families you're planning to destroy. But the one that really got my attention was this one." Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a photocopy he had made of the relevant page. "Eleanor Webb, 74 years old. Property value $195,000. Current offer $90,000. Status pending. Notes. Son Raymond has established trust. Will recommend downsizing when timing is right." He placed the paper on the table and slid it toward his mother. "You were planning to take her home, Ray. Our mother's home, the house where we grew up. You were going to use your relationship with her, your own mother, to convince her to sell for half of what it's worth." The table erupted. Denise was shouting at Raymond. Patricia was demanding explanations. Aunt Gladys was crying. Uncle Morris was pounding the table with his fist. Raymond was trying to defend himself, his voice rising over the chaos. "It's not like that. You don't understand. The development company was going to. I was trying to help the neighborhood." But Marcus wasn't listening anymore. He was watching his mother. Eleanor Webb sat perfectly still in the midst of the chaos. She hadn't looked at the paper Marcus had placed in front of her. She hadn't reacted to the revelation about Raymond's scheme. She hadn't said a single word. She was just watching Marcus with those sharp eyes that had seen so much and revealed so little. And then slowly, she raised her hand. The table fell silent. It happened gradually. First, Denise stopped shouting, then Patricia, then the others, until everyone was looking at Eleanor waiting. She lowered her hand and took a deep breath. "Before you say anything else," she said, her voice calm and clear, "I need to tell you something." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "I know you're a billionaire, Marcus. I've known for 5 years." The words hit like a physical blow. "I know about your company in Seattle. I've read the articles about you in Forbes, in TechCrunch, in the Wall Street Journal. I watched you climb from nothing to the top of the technology world. I knew you weren't bankrupt. I knew this whole thing was a test." Marcus couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't breathe. "And I let it happen," Eleanor continued. "I let your sisters reject you. I let your brother deceive you. I let you discover that ledger. I let you sit here tonight thinking you were about to expose everyone." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer, but somehow more devastating. "Because I needed you to understand something, Marcus. Something you should have learned a long time ago, but never did." Marcus found his voice. "What are you talking about?" Eleanor leaned forward slightly. "You came home with a lie. You created a test designed to bring out the worst in people. And then you acted surprised when people failed. But what did you expect? You gave them every reason to show their selfish sides. You practically begged them to disappoint you. That doesn't excuse—" "I'm not finished." Marcus closed his mouth. "Your obsession with testing people's loyalty, with proving that no one really loves you, is exactly why you're so lonely. You've been doing this your whole life, Marcus, looking for evidence that people can't be trusted, setting traps, waiting for betrayal, and when people inevitably fall into the traps you've set, you use it as proof that you were right all along." She shook her head slowly. "But you're not right. You're just afraid. You're so afraid of being hurt that you've built walls around yourself so high that no one can get through. And then you blame everyone else for not climbing over them." Marcus felt tears building behind his eyes. He blinked them back. "There's something else you need to know," Eleanor said. "Something I should have told you a long time ago." She reached across the table and took his hand. 15 years ago, when you told me you were moving to Seattle to start a company, I wanted to stop you. I wanted to tell you it was too risky, that you should stay here where it was safe, but I didn't." She paused. "Instead, I took your father's life insurance money, every penny of it, and I invested it in your startup, through an anonymous angel investor group. You never knew. You thought you built everything yourself from nothing. But I was there from the beginning. I was the one who believed in you before anyone else did. I was the one who took the biggest risk on your success." The room was completely silent now. Even Raymond had stopped trying to defend himself. Everyone was staring at Eleanor. "You came home to judge a family you thought was greedy," she continued. "But Marcus, you were the greedy one. You were so focused on what everyone could do for you, so focused on testing whether people's love was real, that you never stopped to consider what had already been sacrificed for you." Marcus felt something break inside him. Some wall that he had been building for 15 years, brick by brick, crumbled into dust. "True character isn't just how people treat the poor," Eleanor said. "It's how the wealthy choose to honor the truth. It's how people treat you when you have nothing, yes, but it's also how you treat the people who loved you before you had anything at all." She released his hand and sat back in her chair. Marcus looked around the table. At his sisters, who were staring at him with expressions he couldn't read. At his aunts and uncles frozen in place. At Raymond, whose face was a mask of shame and confusion. And at his mother, who had just dismantled everything he thought he knew about himself and his family. He had come to this diner ready to deliver righteous judgment. ready to expose everyone's greed and walk away victorious. Instead, he had been the one exposed. He had been the one judged. And the verdict was devastating. The silence that followed Eleanor's words was the heaviest Marcus had ever experienced. He sat there frozen, staring at his mother as if seeing her for the first time. His mind was racing, trying to process everything she had just said, trying to reconcile the narrative he had been telling himself for 15 years with this new, devastating truth. She had known. All along she had known. And the investment. The angel investor who had believed in his startup when no one else would. The anonymous benefactor who had provided the seed money that made everything possible. That had been her. His mother. Using his father's life insurance, the only thing Walter Webb had left behind, to bet on a son who didn't even know she was watching. How long? Marcus's voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. How long have you been planning this? Eleanor tilted her head slightly. Planning what exactly? This, tonight. All of it. I wasn't planning anything, Marcus. I was waiting. There's a difference. Denise finally found her voice. Mama, what is going on? Did you know he wasn't really broke this whole time? Eleanor turned to look at her eldest daughter. Yes. And you didn't say anything. You just let us... Denise stopped, realizing what she was about to admit. Let you what? Eleanor's voice was gentle but unflinching. Let you show your true colors. Let you reject your own brother because you thought he had nothing to offer you anymore. Denise's face flushed red. She opened her mouth closed. It opened it again. I was going to help him, she said weakly. I just needed time to figure out the logistics. No, you weren't. Eleanor's words were simple, devastating. You were going to let him struggle while you protected your comfortable life. And that's the truth, Denise. You can tell yourself whatever story makes you feel better, but we both know what happened. Denise looked like she had been slapped. Patricia stood up suddenly, her chair scraping against the floor. This is insane. This whole thing is insane. You're telling me this was some kind of test, some kind of trap? I didn't set the trap, Eleanor said calmly. Marcus did. I just let it play out. Patricia turned to Marcus, her eyes blazing. You came here to trick us, to make us look bad. What kind of person does that to their own family? Marcus felt the accusation land like a blow, because she was right. He had come home with deception in his heart, looking for evidence to confirm his worst beliefs. He had manipulated the situation to bring out the worst in everyone. But before he could respond, Raymond spoke. I think we're missing the bigger picture here. Everyone turned to look at him. Raymond had been quiet since Marcus exposed the ledger. His face had gone through several shades of pale, and his hands were trembling slightly on the table. But now something shifted in his expression. A hardness crept into his eyes. Yeah, I'm involved in a real estate deal, so what? That's business. That's how the world works. You think those big developers play fair? You think they're not doing the exact same thing on a bigger scale? Marcus stared at his brother in disbelief. You're seriously going to defend this? I'm going to tell you the truth since that's apparently what we're doing tonight. Raymond's voice was rising. Those properties are going to get bought one way or another. Those old folks are going to sell eventually to someone. At least with me, they're selling to someone who grew up in this neighborhood, someone who understands. Someone who's offering them half of what their homes are worth, Marcus shot back. Someone who's targeting vulnerable people because they're easier to manipulate. They're not being manipulated, they're being given an option. An option to get ripped off. Raymond slammed his hand on the table. The glasses rattled. Aunt Gladys let out a small cry. You want to talk about ripping people off? Raymond was standing now, leaning across the table toward Marcus. Let's talk about you. Billionaire Marcus Webb, who flew home in his private jet. Oh yeah, I know about that. I'm not as stupid as you think, and rented some beat-up car to pretend he was poor. Who lied to his entire family for 3 weeks. Who worked alongside me every day, ate my food, slept in my house while secretly judging all of us. His voice cracked with emotion. You came here looking down on us. Looking down on me. The whole time you were thinking about how much better you were than everyone else. How you were the successful one, the smart one, the one who made it out. And we were just the losers you left behind. Marcus felt the words pierce something deep inside him. That's not, he started. That's exactly what it was. Raymond's eyes were wet now, tears of anger and hurt spilling over. You want to know why I got into the real estate thing. You want to know why I was willing to do whatever it took to make some real money. He pointed at Marcus. Because of you. Because I spent my whole life being compared to you. Why can't you be more like Marcus? Marcus was so smart. Marcus worked so hard. Marcus is going to be somebody. Every time I failed at something, Mama would get this look in her eye, and I knew she was thinking about you. Wishing I was more like her precious Marcus. Eleanor's face tightened, but she didn't interrupt. And then you made it big. You became a billionaire. And suddenly, you were too important to come home except for holidays. Too busy to call. Too successful to remember the people who knew you when you were nobody. But whenever you did show up, everyone acted like Jesus himself had descended from heaven to bless us with his presence. Raymond's voice dropped to something raw and wounded. I was just trying to prove that I could make something of myself too. That I wasn't just Marcus Webb's loser brother. Maybe I went too far. Maybe I made some bad choices. But at least I was trying. At least I was fighting for something. What's your excuse? The question hung in the air. Marcus looked at his brother, really looked at him, and for the first time, he saw past the scheme, past the betrayal, to the pain underneath. The years of feeling overlooked, the constant comparisons, the desperate need to prove himself in a family where one son had cast such a long shadow. It didn't excuse what Raymond had done, but it explained it. Ray, Marcus began. Don't. Raymond held up his hand. I don't want your pity. I don't want your understanding. And I definitely don't want your money. He turned to their mother. And you, Mama, you knew about this the whole time. You knew Marcus wasn't really broke, and you just sat there and watched me welcome him into my home. Eleanor met his gaze steadily. Yes. Why? Because you needed to see who you were becoming. Both of you did. Raymond laughed bitterly. So this was a lesson, a teaching moment. You let your sons tear each other apart so we could learn something. I let my sons show each other who they really are. Eleanor's voice was sad but firm. I didn't make you run that scheme, Raymond. I didn't make you plan to take my house. That was your choice. Just like it was Marcus's choice to come home with lies instead of love. She looked around the table at all of them, her children, her relatives, her family. Every single person at this table made choices over the past 3 weeks. Some of you chose selfishness. Some of you chose greed. Some of you chose deception. And some of you... She paused, her eyes landing on Marcus, chose distrust over faith. What were we supposed to do? Denise burst out. He said he was bankrupt. He said he needed help. We have our own lives, our own problems. He's your brother. Those 3 words silenced Denise more effectively than anything else could have. I don't care if he was bankrupt or a billionaire or living on the street. Eleanor continued. He's your brother. He came home asking for help. And you calculated. You weighed. You measured what it would cost you to help him against what you might gain. And when the math didn't work out in your favor, you said no. Denise's lower lip trembled. Mama. That's not family. That's business. And if I raised you to think of your own blood like a business transaction, then I failed. That's on me. For the first time since the conversation began, Eleanor's composure cracked. Her voice wavered slightly. Your father would be ashamed, she said quietly. Walter Webb worked himself into an early grave trying to provide for this family. He never had much, but what he had he shared. He believed that family meant something, that blood was thicker than water, that when one of us was hurting, we all showed up. She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. And look at us now. Look at what we've become. The table sat in heavy silence. Marcus watched his mother, this woman who had sacrificed everything for him without ever asking for recognition, who had taken her husband's life insurance and betted on a son who was too arrogant to even acknowledge where his success came from, who had spent 5 years watching him become wealthy beyond imagination while she lived in the same modest house, never asking for anything, never revealing what she had done. "Mama," he said, his voice breaking. "Why didn't you tell me about the investment? About any of it?" Eleanor looked at him with eyes full of love and sadness. "Would you have listened?" The question cut deep because Marcus knew the answer. 15 years ago, he wouldn't have listened. He was too proud, too determined to prove that he could make it on his own. If his mother had told him she was investing in his company, he probably would have refused the money. He would have seen it as charity, as doubt in his ability to succeed without help. And later, when he was successful, when he was building his empire and accumulating wealth beyond his wildest dreams, would he have wanted to know that it had started with his mother's sacrifice, that his self-made story was actually a story of a mother's faith? No. He wouldn't have wanted to know that either. "I was too proud," he admitted. "I am too proud." "You are," Eleanor nodded. "But pride isn't the worst of your sins, Marcus. Fear is. You're so afraid of being loved for the wrong reasons that you've made it impossible for anyone to love you at all. You push people away before they can disappoint you. You test them before you trust them. And when they fail your tests, they never knew they were taking you use it as an excuse to retreat further into yourself." She reached across the table and took his hand again. "You've spent 15 years running from this family, running from vulnerability, running from the possibility of being hurt. And where has it gotten you? You have more money than you could spend in 10 lifetimes, and you're completely alone." Marcus felt tears streaming down his face now. He didn't try to stop them. "I don't know how to be any other way," he whispered. "Then learn." Eleanor squeezed his hand tightly. "You're not too old to learn, Marcus. You're not too successful. You're not too smart. Learning to trust people, learning to love without conditions, learning to accept that everyone, including you, is flawed and broken and capable of both wonderful and terrible things. That's the work of a lifetime. And you've barely started." She released his hand and sat back. "Now, the question is, what are you going to do next?" Marcus looked around the table, at his sisters, who were both crying now, at his aunts and uncles who looked shell-shocked, at Raymond, who had slumped back in his chair staring at nothing, and at his mother, who was waiting for his answer. "I don't know," Marcus said honestly. "I had a whole plan. I was going to expose everyone, show you all my real bank account, tell you that you weren't getting a penny because you'd all failed my test. I was going to walk away feeling righteous and justified." He shook his head slowly. "But now, I don't know what to do. Everything I thought I knew about this family, about myself, has been turned upside down." "That's a good place to start," Eleanor said. "What do you mean?" "I mean that certainty is the enemy of growth. As long as you're sure you're right, you can't learn anything new. But once you admit that you don't know, that you might be wrong, that there's more to the story than what you've been telling yourself, that's when change becomes possible." Marcus wiped his eyes with his sleeve. "What about Raymond? What about the scheme?" Eleanor turned to look at her youngest son. Raymond hadn't moved. He sat there, shoulders hunched, staring at the table. "Raymond?" He didn't respond. "Raymond, look at me." Slowly, reluctantly, Raymond raised his eyes to meet his mother's. "What you've been doing is wrong. You know that. I know you know that because I raised you better. Those people you're targeting, Dorothy Patterson, the Williams family, all of them, they're not obstacles to your success. They're human beings. They're your neighbors. They're people who watched you grow up." Raymond's jaw tightened. I know why you did it, Eleanor continued. I know you felt overlooked, underestimated, stuck in your brother's shadow. And I'm sorry for my part in that. I should have done better at making you feel valued for who you are, not compared to who Marcus was. Her voice softened. But that doesn't excuse what you've done. You were going to take my home, Raymond. My home. The place where I raised you, where I've lived for 40 years, where your father's memory still lives in every room. You were going to trick me into selling it so you could make a profit. Raymond's face crumpled. I wasn't. His voice broke. I would have figured something out. I would have made sure you were okay. I just needed. You needed to prove yourself. Eleanor finished. I know, but not like this. Never like this. She stood up from the table, and everyone watched as she walked around to where Raymond was sitting. She put her hands on his shoulders. You're going to end this scheme. Tonight. Tomorrow at the latest. You're going to call your partners and tell them you're out. You're going to take that ledger and burn it, and then you're going to spend the rest of your life making amends for what you almost did. Raymond looked up at her, his eyes red and swollen. And if I don't, then you're not the son I raised, and I will personally go to every family in that ledger and tell them what you were planning. I will make it impossible for you to complete a single deal in this town or any other. Her voice was steel-wrapped in velvet. I love you, Raymond. I will always love you, but I will not let you destroy yourself or hurt innocent people just because you can't figure out another way to feel important. You're better than this. Prove it. For a long moment, Raymond just stared at his mother. Then something in him seemed to collapse. The defiance drained away, replaced by something that looked almost like relief. Okay, he said quietly. Okay, what? Okay, I'll end it. I'll call Marcus. He stopped, remembering that Marcus was sitting right there, that Marcus now knew everything. I'll call the development company and tell them I'm out. I'll destroy the ledger. Eleanor nodded once. Good. She turned to Denise and Patricia, who were huddled together at the other end of the table. And you two. You're going to think long and hard about what family means to you, about whether you want to be the kind of people who only show up when it's convenient. Because I'm getting old and I won't be here forever. And when I'm gone, all you'll have is each other. Denise nodded mutely. Patricia was crying too hard to respond. Eleanor returned to her seat and looked at Marcus. And you, my son, my brilliant, successful, deeply foolish son. Despite everything, Marcus almost smiled at that. You're going to stop testing people. You're going to stop looking for evidence that you can't trust anyone. You're going to take all that money, all that success, all that power you've accumulated, and you're going to ask yourself what it's actually for. Because if all it does is build walls between you and the people who love you, then it's worthless. It's less than worthless. It's a prison. Marcus nodded slowly. I understand. Do you? Because understanding and doing are two very different things. I know. He took a deep breath. I don't have all the answers yet. I don't know exactly what I'm going to do. But I know I can't go back to how things were. I can't keep living like this. Eleanor smiled, the first genuine smile Marcus had seen from her all evening. That's enough for now. That's a start. She looked around the table one final time, taking in her fractured, flawed, complicated family. Now, is anyone hungry because I didn't spend all day cooking just for us to let that food go to waste? The question was so mundane, so ordinary after everything that had just happened, that it took everyone a moment to process it. Then Uncle Morris let out a surprised laugh. Woman, you just turned this family inside out, and you're asking if we want dinner. I'm asking if you want to start acting like a family again. Eleanor stood up and gestured for the waitress. And in this family, we start with food. We always have. Slowly, tentatively, people began to move. Conversations started. Orders were placed. The rigid, painful tension in the room began to thaw just slightly. Marcus watched it all unfold, feeling like he was standing at the edge of something new and terrifying. He had come home looking for proof that his family didn't love him. Instead, he had found proof that he didn't know how to let himself be loved. And now, somehow, he had to learn. The food arrived 20 minutes later, but Marcus barely tasted it. He sat there pushing fried chicken around his plate, watching his family attempt to navigate the wreckage of the evening. Conversations were stilted, careful. People spoke in fragments as if afraid that anything more might shatter the fragile truce that Eleanor had somehow imposed. Aunt Gladys asked Patricia about the charity gala. Patricia answered in monosyllables. Uncle Morris made a comment about the weather, and Denise responded with something about her kids' school schedules. It was the verbal equivalent of walking on eggshells, everyone desperate to fill the silence, but terrified of saying anything that mattered. Raymond hadn't spoken since his mother's ultimatum. He sat at the far end of the table, his food untouched, staring at something only he could see. Every few minutes, his hand would drift toward his pocket, where his phone was, and then he would stop himself, as if remembering that the calls he needed to make couldn't happen here. Marcus watched his brother and felt something complicated churning in his chest. Anger, yes, Raymond had been planning to swindle their own mother. But also something else. Something that felt uncomfortably like recognition. Because wasn't Marcus guilty of the same thing in his own way? He had come home with lies. He had manipulated the situation. He had set traps and waited for people to fall into them. The methods were different, but the underlying impulse was the same, a desperate need to prove something, to feel powerful, to control outcomes that scared him. "You're not eating." Marcus looked up. His mother was watching him with those sharp eyes that seemed to see everything. "Not very hungry." "You should eat anyway. You've lost weight since you got here. Working outside agrees with you in some ways, but you've been neglecting yourself." Marcus almost laughed at the absurdity of it. His mother in the middle of the most explosive family confrontation in memory, worrying about whether he was eating enough. But that was Eleanor Webb. That had always been Eleanor Webb. Holding the family together with food and stubbornness, and a love so fierce it sometimes felt like a force of nature. "Mama," Marcus said quietly, leaning closer so the others couldn't hear. "About the investment. About Dad's life insurance." Eleanor held up her hand. "Not here. Not now. But I need to understand." "And you will. But some conversations aren't for restaurants and family dinners." She patted his hand gently. "Come to the house tomorrow. Just you and me. We'll talk then." Marcus nodded, accepting the delay, even though part of him wanted to push, wanted to know everything right now. "Okay." The dinner continued for another hour, though it felt much longer. Eventually, people began making excuses to leave. Uncle Morris had an early shift. Aunt Gladys was tired. Various cousins remembered obligations they had apparently forgotten about until just now. One by one, they hugged. Eleanor nodded awkwardly at Marcus and filed out of the diner. None of them said goodbye to Raymond. None of them looked at him at all. Finally, only the four siblings and their mother remained. Denise stood up first, smoothing down her expensive suit. "Mama, I should get going too. The kids are fine. Marcus is a few years older than your youngest, and that boy has been staying up past midnight since he was 12. Denise hesitated. "Sit down, Denise." It wasn't a request. Denise sat. "We're not done here," Eleanor said. "We've aired the dirty laundry and that's important. But now we have to figure out what happens next." "What do you mean, what happens next?" Patricia asked. Her makeup was smeared from crying, but she had stopped sniffling at some point during the meal. "We go back to our lives. We try to do better. What else is there?" "There's the matter of this family's future," Eleanor said. "And whether we're going to have one." The words hung in the air. "I'm 74 years old," Eleanor continued. "My health is good, thank God, but I'm not naive. I've got maybe 15-20 years left if I'm lucky. And I've been thinking a lot lately about what I'm going to leave behind." "Mama, don't talk like that," Denise started. "Hush, I'm not being morbid, I'm being realistic. And what I've realized is that the most important thing I can leave behind isn't money or property or any of that. It's a family that actually functions, a family that takes care of each other. And right now we don't have that. She looked at each of her children in turn. Denise, you've spent so many years climbing the corporate ladder that you've forgotten what it means to be present for the people who matter. When's the last time you called me just to talk? Not to ask for advice about work, not to complain about your husband, but just to check in. Denise's face reddened. She didn't answer. Patricia, you're so concerned with appearances, with what other people think, that you've lost track of what actually matters. You were worried about your charity gala's aesthetic while your brother was standing in front of you asking for help. Do you understand how that sounds? Patricia looked down at her hands. Raymond. Eleanor's voice softened slightly, but the steel underneath remained. You let yourself believe that success was more important than integrity, that the ends justified the means, and you almost crossed a line that there would be no coming back from. Raymond said nothing. His jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on the table. And Marcus. Eleanor turned to her second oldest son, and something in her expression shifted. My brilliant, successful Marcus, you have more money than God, and you've never been more lost. You came home not to reconnect with your family, but to test us, to prove that we weren't worthy of you. And in doing so, you proved that you don't know the first thing about how love actually works. Marcus felt the words land like blows, but he didn't look away. He had earned this. So here's what's going to happen, Eleanor continued. We're going to rebuild this family, not because I'm ordering you to, but because I'm asking you to, and because deep down, I think you all want the same thing. What makes you think that? Raymond spoke for the first time in over an hour. His voice was hoarse, bitter. What makes you think any of us actually want this? Maybe we're all happier going our separate ways. Maybe the problem is that we keep trying to force something that doesn't work. Eleanor studied her youngest son for a long moment. Is that what you believe, Raymond? That this family is beyond repair? Raymond was silent. Because if that's true, then everything you've done makes sense. If you really believe that family doesn't matter, that blood means nothing, then why not run a scheme that targets your own neighbors? Why not plan to take your mother's house? If everyone is just looking out for themselves anyway, you might as well get yours. Raymond flinched. But I don't think that's what you believe, Eleanor continued. I think you're angry and hurt, and you've been carrying that pain for so long that it's twisted into something ugly. I think you wanted to matter to this family, and when you felt like you didn't, you decided to make us pay for it. You don't know what it's like, Raymond said, his voice cracking. You don't know what it's like to be the one everyone forgets about, the one who's never quite good enough, the one who's always being compared to... He stopped, glancing at Marcus. To me, Marcus finished quietly. Raymond didn't confirm it, but he didn't deny it either. Marcus took a deep breath. This was the moment. He could feel it. Everything that had happened, the test, the discovery, his mother's revelations, it all led here. To this choice. He could defend himself. He could point out that he hadn't asked to be successful, hadn't asked to be the standard everyone else was measured against. He could argue that it wasn't his fault Raymond felt overlooked. Or he could do something else. You're right, Marcus said. Raymond's head snapped up. What? You're right. I left and I never looked back. I told myself I was building something that I was too busy to come home, that the family would understand. But the truth is, I didn't want to come back. I didn't want to be reminded of where I came from. I didn't want to deal with all the complicated feelings and relationships and histories. Marcus's voice was steady, but his heart was pounding. I told myself that everyone back here just wanted my money, that they didn't really care about me, and maybe some of that was true for some people. But I used it as an excuse to stay away, to keep everyone at arm's length, To never have to be vulnerable with the people who knew me before I was successful. He looked at his brother. I'm sorry, Ray. I'm sorry I wasn't a better brother. I'm sorry I let you feel like you didn't matter. And I'm sorry that my absence gave you a reason to become someone you're not proud of. The table was completely silent. Raymond stared at Marcus like he was seeing a stranger. In all their years, in all their interactions, Marcus had never apologized for anything. He had always been so certain of himself, so confident in his own righteousness. And now here he was admitting fault, admitting weakness, admitting that he had contributed to his brother's pain. Raymond started, then stopped. He ran his hand over his face. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything right now, Marcus replied. I just needed you to know. Eleanor was watching her sons with an expression that Marcus couldn't quite read. Pride, maybe. Or hope. Or simply the exhaustion of a mother who had been carrying this family's burdens for far too long. This is a start, she said quietly. This is how we begin. Denise spoke up hesitantly. Marcus, I owe you an apology too. Marcus turned to his eldest sister. When you showed up saying you were bankrupt, I didn't even hesitate. I immediately started thinking about how it would affect me, what it would cost me, whether it was worth the inconvenience. Her voice trembled slightly. I didn't think about you at all, about what you must have been going through, about how much courage it must have taken to come home and ask for help. She wiped at her eyes. I've been so focused on my career, on proving myself, on making sure my kids have everything I didn't have growing up. And somewhere along the way, I forgot what actually matters. I became exactly the kind of person I always swore I wouldn't be. Patricia nodded, adding her own confession. I was even worse. I literally said you would ruin the aesthetic. I've been replaying that in my head all evening. How could I say that to my own brother? What kind of person says that? A person who's lost their way, Eleanor said gently. But being lost doesn't have to be permanent. You can always find your way back. Marcus looked around the table at his siblings. These people he had grown up with, fought with, loved, and resented in equal measure. They were all flawed. They were all capable of selfishness and pettiness and worse. But they were also capable of this, of sitting here in the wreckage of their pretenses and trying to figure out how to be better. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was the starting point. So what do we do now? Marcus asked, looking at his mother. How do we actually rebuild this? Eleanor smiled tiredly. We start small. We start with showing up. Not just for the big moments, the holidays, the emergencies, but for the ordinary days. A phone call once a week, a visit once a month. Remembering birthdays without needing a reminder on your phone. She stood up from the table. And we start by going home and getting some sleep because it's late and we're all exhausted and emotional and nothing productive happens when people are running on empty. Marcus stood as well. His body ached from the tension of the evening, from holding himself rigid for hours while his entire world was turned upside down. Can I give you a ride home, Mama? Eleanor shook her head. Denise will drive me. You need to take Raymond. Marcus glanced at his brother. Raymond was still sitting still, staring at the table. He looked smaller, somehow diminished by the evening's revelations. Ray, Marcus said, come on, let's go. Raymond didn't move for a long moment. Then slowly he pushed himself up from the table. He didn't look at anyone as he walked toward the exit. The siblings exchanged glances, complicated looks, full of things they didn't have the energy to say. Then they gathered their coats and bags and headed for the parking lot. Outside, the night air was cold and sharp. It felt cleansing somehow, like it was washing away the heaviness of everything that had been said inside. Marcus caught up to Raymond at the truck. His brother was standing by the driver's side door, keys in hand, but not moving. I should drive, Marcus said quietly. Raymond didn't argue. He just handed over the keys and walked around to the passenger side. They drove in silence for the first few minutes. The streets were mostly empty at this hour, just the occasional car passing in the opposite direction. headlights briefly illuminating the interior of the truck before fading away. Finally, Raymond spoke. "I'm going to call them tonight." "The development company." "Yeah." Raymond's voice was flat, exhausted. "I'm going to tell them I'm out, that the deal is off, that they need to find someone else." "What will they say?" Raymond laughed bitterly. "They'll be pissed. There's a lot of money at stake. They might threaten me. They might try to sue me. There are contracts involved." "I can help with that," Marcus said. "I know lawyers, good ones, the kind who can make problems go away." Raymond turned to look at him. "Why would you do that after everything I did?" Marcus kept his eyes on the road. "Because you're my brother. And because Mama's right, we're either a family or we're not. And if we're going to be a family, that means helping each other, even when we screw up, especially when we screw up." Raymond was quiet for a long time. "I don't deserve that," he said finally. "I don't deserve your help." "Maybe not. But that's not really the point, is it? Help isn't about deserving, it's about need. And right now, you need it." They pulled into Raymond's driveway. The house looked the same as it always did, modest, well-maintained, the home of a man who worked with his hands and took pride in his work. But Marcus saw it differently now. He saw the dreams and frustrations contained within those walls, the loneliness, the desperate need to prove something. Raymond turned off the engine but didn't get out of the truck. "I want you to know something," he said. Marcus waited. "When I took you in at the beginning, it wasn't entirely about the scheme. Part of it was, yeah, I thought maybe you'd be useful. But another part of me was actually happy you were here. Happy to have my brother back even if you were broke and struggling. That part was real." His voice cracked. "And then I felt guilty about it, because I knew what I was planning. I knew how it would end. So I tried to convince myself that you were just a means to an end, that I didn't actually care about spending time with you. But I did. Working together, sitting on the porch, talking about Dad, that was real for me. All of it." Marcus reached over and put his hand on his brother's shoulder. "It was real for me too, Ray." Raymond nodded, unable to speak. He wiped his eyes roughly with the back of his hand. "I should go make those calls." "Yeah." Raymond opened the door and stepped out of the truck. Then he paused and looked back. "Are you going to stay at the house, I mean? You can still use the spare room if you want." Marcus considered the question. A few hours ago, the thought of staying another night under the same roof as Raymond would have been unthinkable. Now, somehow, it felt right. "Yeah," he said. "I'll stay, if that's okay." Raymond nodded. "It's okay." They walked into the house together. Raymond went straight to his bedroom and closed the door. A few minutes later, Marcus could hear his muffled voice, the phone call happening. The scheme unraveling, the future changing with every word. Marcus sat at the kitchen table, the same table where he had eaten so many meals over the past 3 weeks. The same table where Raymond had left him notes about making himself at home. So much had happened since then. So much had changed. He pulled out his phone and looked at it for a long moment. There were dozens of notifications. Emails from his CFO, messages from his assistant, alerts from various apps that tracked his investments and businesses. The empire he had built was still out there, still churning, still making him richer by the minute. But sitting here in this modest kitchen listening to his brother try to undo the damage he had caused, Marcus felt further from that world than ever. He typed out a message to his assistant. "Clear my schedule for the next month. All of it. I'll be unavailable." The response came almost immediately. "Sir, you have 17 meetings scheduled in the next 3 weeks. The Shanghai acquisition alone." "Clear it," Marcus typed back. "Delegate what you can, postpone what you can't. I'll explain later." He put the phone face down on the table and sat there in the quiet, listening to the house settle around him. Tomorrow, he would go to his mother's house and have the conversation she had promised. He would learn the full story of the investment, of her sacrifice, of everything she had done for him without his knowledge. Tomorrow, He would start figuring out what it meant to be part of this family again. Not as the successful son who swooped in with money and judgment, but as a brother, a son, a flawed human being trying to do better. Tomorrow, everything would begin to change. But tonight, he was just tired. Bone-deep tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. He was tired of carrying the weight of his own suspicion and fear. Tired of keeping everyone at arm's length. Tired of being so certain that he was right about everything. Raymond emerged from the bedroom about an hour later. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face pale. "It's done," he said quietly. "I'm out. They're not happy, but they'll find someone else." "How do you feel?" Raymond thought about it. Scared, relieved, empty. He sat down across from Marcus at the kitchen table. Mostly empty. That makes sense. Does it? Because I just walked away from a lot of money, a lot of potential. And right now, I don't know what comes next. I don't know who I am without that scheme hanging over me. Marcus nodded slowly. I felt the same way when I first started my company, before everything took off. I had this idea, and I had poured everything into it, and I had no idea if it was going to work. I felt empty too, and scared, and like I didn't know who I was. What changed? I got lucky. The company took off. People started believing in me, and I convinced myself that I had earned it all, that I deserved it, that it was proof of how special I was. Marcus shook his head. But I know now that wasn't entirely true. Mama's investment got me started. Other people's faith kept me going. I didn't do it alone, even though I told myself I did. Raymond was silent for a moment. "Do you think I can actually do this?" he asked. "Be different, I mean. Build something honest. Stop cutting corners and looking for shortcuts." "I think you can. I think you have to try at least. Because the alternative is becoming someone you don't recognize. Someone who can look at Dorothy Patterson's name in a ledger and see an opportunity instead of a person." Raymond flinched at the name. "I was going to take her house," he whispered. "I was going to tell her it was a good deal. That she couldn't afford the upkeep anymore. That she'd be happier somewhere smaller. And she would have believed me because she's known me since I was a kid." "But you didn't do it." "Only because you found the ledger first." "Maybe. Or maybe you would have stopped yourself. Maybe you would have looked at her face and remembered who you were supposed to be and walked away." Raymond shook his head. "You have more faith in me than I deserve." Maybe that's what faith is. Believing in people even when they haven't earned it yet. Marcus stood up from the table. "I'm going to try to get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." "Yeah." Raymond stood as well. "Hey, Marcus." "Yeah." "Thank you. For, I don't know, for not giving up on me. For staying." Marcus smiled tiredly. "That's what brothers are for." He walked down the hall to the spare room, the room that had become unexpectedly familiar over the past 3 weeks. He lay down on the bed without changing his clothes and stared at the ceiling. So much had changed. So much still needed to change. But for the first time in as long as he could remember, Marcus Webb didn't feel alone. Marcus arrived at his mother's house the next morning at 10 o'clock exactly as she had requested. The drive over had been quiet. Raymond had already left for a meeting with his lawyer, one of the attorneys Marcus had recommended, to figure out how to extract himself from the development company without facing a lawsuit. The house had been empty when Marcus woke up, nothing but a note on the kitchen table. "Gone to handle things. Thanks again. Ray." Now Marcus stood on the front porch of the house where he had grown up, the house that Raymond had been planning to take, the house that held 40 years of his mother's memories. He raised his hand to knock, then stopped. The door was already open. Eleanor stood in the doorway wearing a simple dress and an apron dusted with flour. The smell of baking wafted out from behind her, something sweet, something that triggered memories Marcus couldn't quite place. "You're right on time," she said. "Come in. I'm making your father's pound cake." Marcus followed her inside, past the living room, where he had taken his first steps past the hallway, lined with family photographs spanning decades, into the kitchen, where Eleanor Webb had fed her family through good times and bad. She gestured to the kitchen table. "Sit. The cake needs another 20 minutes. We'll talk while it bakes." Marcus sat down in the same chair he had always claimed as a child, the one closest to the window, the one that let him watch the backyard while pretending to pay attention to dinner conversation. Eleanor poured 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of him before taking the seat across the table. "So," she said, "you have questions. About 1,000 of them. Start with the most important one." Marcus wrapped his hands around the coffee cup, feeling its warmth seep into his palms. He had rehearsed this conversation in his head all night, but now that he was here, the words felt inadequate. "Why?" he finally asked. "Why did you invest in my company without telling me? Why did you let me believe I built everything myself?" Eleanor took a sip of her coffee before answering. "Do you remember what you were like at 23 when you told me you were moving to Seattle?" Marcus thought back. That felt like a lifetime ago, another person entirely. "I was determined, stubborn, convinced I knew everything." "You were terrified," Eleanor corrected gently. "You tried to hide it, but I could see it. You had this dream, this vision of what you could build, and you were so afraid that you weren't good enough to make it happen, that you'd fail, that you'd end up back here working some job you hated, wondering what might have been." She set down her cup. "And you had so much pride, Marcus. So much pride. If I had offered you money outright, you would have refused. You would have seen it as doubt in your abilities, as charity. And it would have eaten at you for the rest of your life, wondering whether you actually earned your success or whether it was handed to you." Marcus wanted to argue, but he knew she was right. His younger self would have rejected any help, would have insisted on doing it alone, would have let pride destroy an opportunity that changed his life. "So I found another way," Eleanor continued. "I researched angel investor groups. I learned how startup funding worked, and I found a way to invest your father's life insurance money without you ever knowing it came from me." "How much?" Marcus asked quietly. "How much did you invest?" $50,000. The number hit Marcus like a physical blow. $50,000. His father's entire life insurance payout. Everything Walter Webb had left behind to take care of his family. "Mama, that was supposed to be for you, for emergencies, for your retirement. It was supposed to be for my children's futures," Eleanor said firmly. "And that's exactly what I used it for. Your father worked himself to death trying to give us a better life. He never got to see you succeed. But I knew in my bones that if I gave you that seed money, you would turn it into something extraordinary. And I was right." Marcus felt tears burning behind his eyes. "But what if I had failed? What if the company had gone under? You would have lost everything." "Then I would have lost everything." Eleanor's voice was matter-of-fact. "But I didn't believe you would fail. I believed in you, Marcus. More than you believed in yourself. More than anyone else in the world believed in you. That's what mothers do." She reached across the table and took his hand. "And I was right to believe. You took that $50,000 and turned it into billions. You created jobs for thousands of people. You changed an entire industry. Your father would have been so proud." Marcus couldn't hold back the tears anymore. They spilled down his cheeks, and he didn't bother wiping them away. "Why didn't you tell me later, after I was successful, after the money didn't matter anymore?" Eleanor's expression grew thoughtful. "At first I was going to. I planned to tell you after your first big milestone, when the company went public, when you made your first 100 million. But then I watched you change. I watched you become harder, more distant, more convinced that everyone around you was only interested in your money. And I realized that telling you would only make things worse." "What do you mean?" "Think about it, Marcus. If I had told you 3 years ago that your success was built on my investment, what would you have done? Would you have been grateful, Or would you have found a way to turn it into evidence that even your own mother was trying to manipulate you? The question stung because Marcus knew the answer. 3 years ago, even 3 weeks ago, he would have twisted it somehow. He would have found a way to make it proof that nobody loved him for himself, that even his mother's faith was just another transaction. "You're right," he admitted. "I would have ruined it." "Yes, you would have." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "So I waited. I watched you from a distance, hoping that someday you would find your way back to yourself. Back to the boy I raised, who knew that family meant something, who understood that love wasn't a business deal. And when I showed up pretending to be bankrupt," Eleanor smiled sadly, "I knew the moment I saw you. The clothes were wrong. The car was wrong. The story was wrong. But mostly your eyes were wrong. You didn't look like a man who had lost everything. You looked like a man who was hunting for something. Why didn't you call me out immediately? Because you needed to go through it. You needed to see how your sisters would react, how Raymond would react, how everyone would behave when they thought you had nothing to offer. You needed to experience the rejection you were so sure was coming." She released his hand and sat back in her chair. "And then, you needed to discover Raymond's secret. You needed to see that even the brother who took you in was capable of deception. Because until you saw all of that, until you experienced the worst of what this family could be, you wouldn't have been ready to hear what I had to say." Marcus processed her words slowly. She had orchestrated the entire thing, not by manipulating events, but by choosing not to intervene, by letting the drama unfold naturally, letting everyone reveal themselves, letting Marcus reach the breaking point where he might finally be ready to listen. "You took a big risk," he said. "What if I had just walked away? What if I had exposed everyone and left town without ever talking to you?" "Then I would have lost you," Eleanor said simply. "But I was already losing you. Year after year, watching you drift further away, watching you build walls so high that nobody could reach you. Taking the risk was better than doing nothing." The oven timer went off, cutting through the heaviness of the moment. Eleanor stood up and pulled on oven mitts, opening the oven to check on the pound cake. "Your father's recipe," she said, more to herself than to Marcus. "He used to make this every Sunday. Do you remember?" Marcus did remember. Vague, distant memories of a man in this kitchen, flour on his hands, laughing at something young Marcus had said. Walter Webb had died when Marcus was 10, and most of those memories had faded over the years, worn smooth like stones in a river. "I remember the smell," Marcus said. "I always remembered the smell." Eleanor set the cake on the counter to cool. She stood there for a moment with her back to him, and Marcus realized she was crying too. Silently, privately, the way she had probably cried countless times over the decades. "Mama." She turned around, wiping her eyes with the corner of her apron. "I'm fine. Just memories. This kitchen holds a lot of them." Marcus stood up and crossed the room. He pulled his mother into a hug, a real hug, the kind he hadn't given her in years, maybe decades. "I'm sorry," he said into her hair. "I'm sorry I stayed away. I'm sorry I made you worry. I'm sorry I turned into someone you had to wait 15 years to reach." Eleanor held him tightly, her small frame surprisingly strong. "You're here now. That's what matters." They stood there for a long moment, mother and son in the kitchen, where so many meals had been shared, so many arguments had been resolved, so many memories had been made. Finally, Eleanor pulled back and patted his cheek. "Now, let's talk about what comes next." They returned to the table, and Eleanor's expression grew serious. "You have a choice to make, Marcus. You can go back to Seattle, back to your empire, back to the life you built. You can take what you've learned here and try to apply it from a distance, or—" she paused. "Or what? Or you can stay. Not forever necessarily, but for a while. Long enough to actually rebuild these relationships instead of just talking about it." Marcus considered the idea. A month ago, the thought of staying would have been unthinkable. His entire life was in Seattle. His company, his properties, his routines. But what was all of that worth, really? He had billions of dollars and no one to share it with. He had a penthouse apartment that felt like a museum. He had success beyond his wildest dreams and loneliness that kept him awake at night. "I already cleared my schedule for the next month," he said slowly. "I told my assistant to handle everything." Eleanor's eyebrows rose. "That's a start. But I'm not sure a month is enough. There's so much damage. With Raymond, with Denise, and Patricia, with everyone. It's going to take time." "All the important things do." Marcus nodded. "Then I'll stay. As long as it takes." Eleanor smiled a real smile, the kind that reached her eyes and transformed her entire face. "Good. That's good." She stood up and began cutting the pound cake, placing thick slices on 2 plates. She set one in front of Marcus and kept one for herself. "Eat. You've got a lot of work ahead of you, and you'll need your strength." Marcus took a bite of the cake. It was perfect, moist sweet with a hint of vanilla that triggered a flood of childhood memories. "Tastes exactly like I remember." "Some things don't change," Eleanor said. "The recipe is the same. The love that goes into it is the same. Only we change Marcus, and sometimes, if we're lucky, we change for the better." They ate in comfortable silence, the morning sun streaming through the kitchen window, the house settling around them with familiar creaks and groans. When they finished, Eleanor put the plates in the sink and turned back to her son. "There's one more thing I need to say." Marcus waited. "I'm proud of you. I've always been proud of you, even when you were being impossible. Even when you were pushing everyone away. Even when I wasn't sure if you would ever find your way back." Her voice caught slightly. "You're a good man, Marcus. Underneath all the walls and the tests and the fear, there's a good man in there. Your father would have seen it. I've always seen it. And now it's time for you to see it too." Marcus felt something shift inside him. Some last piece of resistance, some final wall crumbling away. "I'll try," he said. "I'll really try. That's all any of us can do." The weeks that followed were unlike anything Marcus had experienced before. He stayed at Raymond's house, but he spent most of his days elsewhere, visiting his mother, meeting with his sisters, slowly rebuilding connections that had been neglected for too long. The conversations weren't easy. Denise cried when she told him about the pressure she felt, the constant fear of not being enough, the way she had channeled everything into her career because it was the only thing she could control. Patricia admitted that her obsession with appearances was a shield, a way of hiding how insecure she felt about her place in the world. Raymond was the hardest. His extraction from the development deal had been messy. Lawyers were still involved, and there were threats of litigation that Marcus's legal team was handling. But beyond the business complications, there was the deeper work of rebuilding trust between brothers. They talked late into the night, sometimes arguing, sometimes sitting in silence. Raymond explained how he had rationalized the scheme, how he had convinced himself it was just business, how he had buried his conscience under layers of justification. Marcus listened without judgment, recognizing pieces of himself in his brother's confessions. "I wanted to be somebody," Raymond said one night, his voice raw. "I wanted to matter, and somewhere along the way, I decided that the only way to matter was to have money, to have power, to be the one making deals instead of the one getting stepped on." "I understand," Marcus said. "More than you know." Because he did understand. The hunger for success, the fear of being overlooked, the desperate need to prove something. Marcus had felt all of it. The only difference was that his path had led to legitimate success, while Raymond's had veered into something darker. But the impulse was the same. The wound was the same. Raymond started over with his landscaping business, stripping it down to the basics. Honest work, fair prices, no shortcuts. Marcus helped where he could, not with money, but with time. He worked alongside the crew again, hauling mulch and trimming hedges, his hands calloused, now his body stronger than it had been in years. And slowly, something shifted between the brothers. The walls came down. The pretenses fell away. They started talking, really talking about their father, their childhood, their fears and hopes and regrets. "Do you remember when Dad took us fishing?" Raymond asked one evening. Marcus thought about it. Barely. I was so young. I remember everything about it. The way he taught us to bait the hooks. The patience he had when we couldn't catch anything. The way he laughed when you fell in the water trying to reel in a fish that didn't exist. Raymond smiled at the memory. He would have been 67 this year. I think about that sometimes. What he would look like now. What advice he would give. What do you think he would say? Marcus asked. About everything that's happened. Raymond was quiet for a long moment. I think he would be disappointed in me. For the scheme. For what I almost did to Mama. But I also think he would be proud that I stopped. That I chose to be better. He looked at Marcus. And I think he would tell you to stop being such a stubborn idiot and let people love you. Marcus laughed, a real laugh, the kind he hadn't produced in years. Yeah, that sounds like Dad. The month stretched into 2 months, then 3. Marcus restructured his involvement with his company, delegating more responsibility to his executive team, setting up systems that allowed him to be present in a meaningful way without being physically in Seattle. He flew back occasionally for critical meetings, but his center of gravity had shifted. He was here now, with his family, learning how to be part of something larger than himself. He established a foundation in his father's name, the Walter Webb Foundation, dedicated to helping first-generation entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds. He funded it with $50 million of his own money, a symbolic echo of the $50,000 his mother had invested in him. And he did something else, something private. He bought every property in Raymond's ledger, all the homes that had been targeted by the development scheme. But he didn't buy them for himself. He bought them and placed them in a trust that guaranteed the current owners could stay for as long as they wanted, rent-free with all maintenance and property taxes covered. Dorothy Patterson cried when she got the news. She had lived in her house for 52 years, raised 3 children there, buried her husband from its front porch. Now she would never have to leave. Why would you do this? She asked Marcus when he came to explain. I don't even know you. You knew my father, Marcus said. You knew my mother. You're part of this community, and this community deserves to be protected, not exploited. He didn't tell her about Raymond's involvement. That secret belonged to Raymond to confess or keep as he chose. Marcus just let her believe that a stranger had done something kind. Sometimes that was enough. 1 year after the night at the diner, the Webb family gathered again. Not at a restaurant this time, but at Eleanor's house. The dining room was full. Denise and her husband and their 3 kids, Patricia and her boyfriend Raymond, and Jasmine, who was now his fiancée, various aunts and uncles and cousins. And Marcus, sitting at the table where he had eaten so many childhood meals, watching his family laugh and argue and love each other imperfectly, but genuinely. Eleanor stood at the head of the table and raised her glass. 1 year ago, we almost fell apart. 1 year ago, secrets and lies and fear nearly destroyed everything. But we're still here. We're still standing. And we're stronger than we were before. She looked around the room at each face. That's what family is. Not perfection. Not always getting it right. But showing up. Trying again. Choosing each other even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Her eyes landed on Marcus. To second chances. To second chances, everyone echoed. After dinner, Marcus and Eleanor sat on the back porch watching the sun set over the neighborhood. The same neighborhood where Marcus had grown up, where Dorothy Patterson still lived in her house, where Raymond was building something honest with his own 2 hands. You did it, Mama, Marcus said quietly. You held this family together. Eleanor shook her head. I just refused to let go. You all did the work. Without you, we never would have tried. She patted his hand. Maybe, but you found your way back. That's what matters. Marcus looked out at the neighborhood, at the homes and the trees, and the ordinary life unfolding all around them. He thought about everything he had accumulated over the years, the money, the properties, the status, and realized that none of it compared to this moment. sitting with his mother, being part of a family, knowing that he was loved not for what he could provide, but for who he was. "I spent 15 years building a fortune," he said, "and I almost missed everything that actually mattered." Eleanor smiled. "But you didn't miss it. You're here." "Yeah." Marcus took a deep breath, feeling the truth of it settle into his bones. "I'm here." The years that followed weren't perfect. Families never are. There were arguments and misunderstandings, old wounds that flared up and had to be healed again, moments when the old patterns threatened to reassert themselves. But they kept showing up. They kept trying. They kept choosing each other. And Marcus learned slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely what it meant to let himself be loved. He had come home pretending to be poor, looking for evidence that his family was worthless. Instead, he found evidence that he was the one who had lost his way. He had tested them, and in the testing, he had been tested himself. But that was the thing about tests. They didn't just reveal who people were. They revealed who people could become if they chose to. Marcus Webb had been a billionaire who built walls. Now he was something better. He was a son who had learned to trust, a brother who had learned to forgive, a man who had finally understood that the greatest wealth isn't measured in dollars or properties or power. The greatest wealth is measured in the people who love you anyway, not because of what you can give them, but because of who you are. And that in the end was worth more than all the billions in the world.